Introduction to SSRS. Within your organization, there are going to be business owners and managers that need to get information about the underlying database. However, they might not have the technical know-how of extracting that information. So somebody's going to have to be responsible for taking the data in your underlying database and creating a report for it to create some meaningful information to the end user. Well, SQL Server Reporting Services does just that. In this nugget, we'll take a quick look at the SSRS architecture. There's several components to it, and then we're going to create a simple report. There's three main components to a report. There's the page, the group, and the details. After we create a simple report, then we'll take a look at pagination. You can actually create headers and footers and display the page numbers on there. And there's a handful of built-in variables available to you to drag that information to the page. We'll also add some images, so if you want to add a logo to each of the pages, you can do that. And then the last thing we'll do is talk about parameterized reports. Sometimes you want to allow the end user to plug in some information such as the last name or the first name or a customer ID. We'll take it a step further and we'll create a dynamic drop-down list that's database driven. Before we get started with our simple report, let's first of all talk about the SSRS architecture. What we see here is a diagram of SSRS architecture. You'll see on the left-hand side we have clients. Now we have several different choices for our clients. For example, we can use Report Designer. We're going to be focusing on that at the beginning of this nugget, and then we'll later take a look at other different types of clients such as the web browser, report builder, model designer, and so on. There's other third-party tools out there created by other companies besides Microsoft. You'll see here that the client can communicate either directly with a report manager or with a programming interface. And then the programming interface communicates with the report processor, which actually gets the work done. There's several different types of extensions that allow things such as authentication, rendering, data processing, and report processing. And then, of course, there needs to be communication with the data source or a report server database. So in this particular nugget, we're going to be communicating with a data source, which will then communicate with the report processor. Let's get started building a simple report. Now, before you create any reports, you do need to make sure that the appropriate services are up and running. So what I want you to do is go to your control panel, then Administrative Tools, then Services. And once you get to Services, this is what you should see. So here we have our SQL Server service, so we are going to be tapping into the database, so make sure that's started. If it's not, then just double click on it and click the Start button. Also make sure that your reporting services is up and running as well, because this is what the reporting is based on. If you're going to be tapping into a cube in your analysis services, then make sure that that is running as well. Okay, so now that you have your services up and running, you can minimize that and then go to your Business Intelligence Development Studio. Right now I don't have anything open. What I'm going to do is go to File, New, and we're going to create a new project. We have two choices here. We can say Report Server Project Wizard, which steps us through the process, or we can start with a blank report project. We're going to do the wizard first, and then I'll show you how to do it the other way in just a little bit. Okay, so let's call this My Customer Reports, and save this to whatever directory you want to, and then we're going to hit OK. So this takes us through a nice little wizard. And we have a new data source. You can call this data source anything you want to. I'll just call this Customer DS. And you'll see that for the type, we have several different types. Usually it's going to be Microsoft SQL Server, but you can choose from other selections. For example, if your data source is coming from an analysis services cube, you would choose this option. Or if you were tapping into an Oracle database, you would choose this option. You can even use an Access database using ODBC, or if you want to tap into an XML document that's published online, you can use that as well. And there's all these different options as well. So for this example, choose SQL Server. And we're going to need to provide a connection string. So let's click on Edit. And for the server name, we're going to choose whatever server name your database is running on. So in my case, it's Julie1. I'm going to use Windows Authentication, and then I'm going to choose my database name. Okay, so in this case here, I'm going to use my AdventureWorks Data Warehouse 2008. You can also use a database file if you'd like. Okay, so let's stick with this option up here, and then we can test our connection. So click this button right here, and that looks good. So now let's go ahead and hit OK, and you'll see down here that if we check this box that says make this a shared data source, that's going to make it available to several different reports. So I'm going to choose that. Then we hit Next. Then we have to design our query. Now if we know our SQL statement, we can just type it in verbatim right here, or we can use this graphical query builder to select our tables. I like using this query builder because it's nice and graphical. Okay, so just right click on here, and then we'll add a table. You'll see that as we select our tables and as we select the different columns, that it's going to build this little SQL statement down here. What I'm interested in is my customer table, so I'll say dim customer, and then I'll click on Add. And the other thing that I'm interested in is my geography table. So dim geography right here. Now that I've selected those two options, I'll go ahead and hit Close. So you'll see here in our select statement that nothing is actually selected yet because we need to click whatever we're interested in. Now the order in which you click things is the order in which it's listed in this select clause. So I'm going to go to my geography table here, and I'm first of all going to choose the English country region name, and then the state province name, and then the city, as well as under the customer table here, I'm going to grab the first name, last name. I'm going to grab their email address as well as their phone number. Okay, so you'll see how all of this is selected down here. Okay, so now as far as ordering is concerned, we can specify our ordering graphically through here, or we can type it in directly. I'm going to just pull this down a little bit. And let's first of all order by the region name. So under sort order, we'll just say 1. Then we're going to provide secondary sorting on the state. So this will be 2. And then by city, then by the last name. So that would be number 4. Then by the first name. And there we go. Okay, so far that looks great. We're going to then click OK, and then we can click Next, and then we have a choice between tabular, notice the look and feel here, versus matrix. Let's choose tabular, and then hit Next. Now we have 3 different options as far as where these different fields are going to go. Now the page is just asking, how do you want to paginate things? For example, for all the different regions, we can have those begin on a new page. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that on a new page. You'll see how it's at the top there. And then under the groups, I'm going to group first of all by state, province, and then by city. You can actually hit your Control key to select both of those and then click on Group. Then for the details, you can select everything else below there to go like that. Now when we run our report, you'll see how this is actually displayed. So let's go ahead and hit Next. And we have 2 different options here. It can be stepped, like you see here, or it can be in block format. I prefer the look and feel of stepped. Now if we're dealing with numeric information, we can include subtotals, but we don't have any of that quite yet. We can also enable drill down, which lets us collapse and expand different things such as the state and city and so on. So let's select enable drill down, and then we'll hit next. We have several different table styles, so there's slate, forest, and so on. I'm just going to stick with slate and then hit next. Here's our report server. If this is going to some other location, then you can specify where the host name is. So in my case, mine is localhost and then report server. The deployment folder is under my customer reports. So then I hit next, and I can call this customer by geography. And then we can preview our report and hit finish. This might take a few seconds the first time, but you should see a preview of this in a few seconds. So you should see this little thing that says report is being generated. I'll move this over a little bit so it's a little easier for you to read. And here we have. Here's our customer by geography. We can change this name in just a moment when we go into design mode. So notice that we have two different tabs here. We have preview mode and we have design mode. Whenever you want to make any modifications, make sure you go to design mode, and then when you want to test it, you go to preview mode. So notice at the top of this page we have Australia. If we go to the next page, we have Canada, then we've got France, Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and you get the picture. Okay, so enabling drill down gives you this. Here we have this collapsed node right here. We can expand it, and we get the different cities. Once again, we can expand that, and we get the details. So notice how these are ordered first by the last name, and then the first name, and so on. One of the things we can do here is rename this title to look a little bit better. We can also make these columns wider, and we can change the headings if we want to. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into design, and you can modify the title right here. Customer, we'll say customer by region. And then if you want to move any of these, see how I have my arrow going back and forth here? We can make these a little bit wider. So now it'll look a lot nicer when we run this. Let's say that we wanted to change the order of the first name and last name. In other words, if we want to display the last name and then the first name. Well, what you can do, there's a couple ways you can do this, but one of the ways is you can just right-click on here and say delete columns, and then you can go in here and drag and drop. So what we want to do is grab the first name and drag it right there. Another way you can modify that is simply by clicking first of all on this heading in here, changing the heading, and then clicking on this right down here and changing this option down here. It's just easier, in my opinion, to drag and drop. Now we have some parent-child relationships, and when you're in design mode, if you look down here under the grouping information, here I'll pull this up a little bit so it's easier to read, you'll see that we have the state province name, which is a parent of, the city, which is a parent of, the details group. Okay, so you can look at any of the properties there and make modifications, which we'll take a closer look at in a little while. Okay, so now that we've made those modifications, we can go to preview and see what it looks like again. So it's always going to be a back and forth toggle. Okay, so there we have our last name and then the first name. Expand that just to make sure everything looks fine. Okay, you might want to make your email address a little bit wider as well as the phone, but now you know how to make those columns wider. Let's talk about pagination a little bit. We're going to go to design mode again, and what I'd like to do is on each page have a little blurb that says page something of something. For example, page 1 of 6. So the way we do that is we use our built-in fields. If you expand this, you'll see that we're under report data. If you don't see this report data area, then go to view and select report data. Okay, so if you expand your built-in fields, you'll see that we have page number as well as total pages. And what you can do is put that either in the header or the footer section or both. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my report, click somewhere in my report here, and you'll see that we have these little icons, page header, page footer. I'm going to put this in my header, so I'll just click right there, and you'll see that we have this section right here. Now it tells us to add an item to the page header, so we just drag it. Okay, so I'm going to put in here page number, drag that over there, and I can put some text in there beforehand. I can say, for example, page, and then I have my little blurb right there of, and then drag my total pages right there. Now, in this design view, it looks like it's spanning several rows, but it's actually not. If we go into our preview mode, it'll look pretty nice. There's page 1 of 6, page 2 of 6, and so on. Now, if you want to make this go a little more to the left, you can do that, not a problem. You simply drag this and move it over to wherever you want it to go. Okay, so I'm just going to move this right over there. So those are the two most common built-in fields that we use, page number and total pages. Now, another thing that you can do is add images to your report. Let's say that in the upper right-hand corner, we want to have our company logo. Well, what we do is we go to our toolbox. So if you don't see your toolbox, go to View and then select your toolbox. And here we have Image. So go ahead and drag this image. Let's go ahead and put it in the upper right corner. And we'll call this company logo. You can even add a tooltip to it if you want to. For the image source, just say embedded, and then we're going to import the image. So mine is going to be under CBT logo, and there it is right there. Mine happens to be a PNG file, yours might be a GIF or a JPEG, and then you can select the size if you want to. You can choose the visibility options and so on. Let's just stick with the default for right now, and we'll hit OK. So you'll see in my upper right hand corner, here's my little image. You can make it larger by dragging it. So I might want to drag it right there. Okay, now we can preview this. There's our nice little logo. And then we go on to our next page, and you'll see that that logo is appearing on every page. So that looks really nice. Now, let's say that we just wanted a basic report of the different customers, and we're not really concerned with which region they're in. Maybe we're concerned more with the customer name as well as what internet purchases were made. Okay, so the way we can do that is we can just right-click on reports. We can create another report. So I want you to just say, Add New Report. This is going to be using the shared data source that we created a minute ago. Then we hit Next, and here's our query builder. So let's right-click on here and add a table. Choose your DIM customer, as well as your fact table. Here's the fact internet sales. We'll add that and then close it. So what we're going to display is the customer key, their first name. Actually, let's do their last name first and then their first name. And then their email address and phone number, as well as their sales order number, sales order line number, and let's grab the sales amount. As far as ordering by, let's order first of all by the last name and then by the first name. You'll see here now it's ordered by down here. Okay, so now we can hit OK. And then Next. Let's stick with tabular. Hit Next again. Now we're not going to mess with the page fields or even the group fields. What we're going to do is put everything under Details, like this. And then we can hit Next. Choose whichever style you want. Hit Next again. and then we'll just call this customer list. And then we can preview our report. Now, there's quite a few records in the customers table, so this might take a few seconds or even up to a minute. So be patient with this. In a little while, I'll show you how to narrow things down by using parameters. So here is our customer key, last name, first name, email address, and so on. You'll see here we have the sales order number, the sales order line number, and so on. If you'll notice here in the list, we have quite a few entries for Aaron Adams. In fact, there's lots of duplicates here because it's one person, one customer, yet a few entries for the orders. So what we can do is narrow things down. Maybe we want to provide a parameter for the last name or the first name or both. So that's what I'm going to show you right now, is how to modify your query. So we're going to go back to our design mode, and under your data set, I want you to go ahead and right click on your data set and click on query. And you'll see here that we've got our SQL query down here. If we want to put a where clause in there, we can. So here I might say, for example, where last name equals, and then let's put in here LName. This is a parameter. Anything that has an @ sign before it is a parameter. So the quick and easy way of creating a parameter is by hitting this exclamation point. And here we have our query parameters. Now you can put a default value in here if you want, or you can just keep it as null. And then you can hit OK. Hit OK again, and then you'll see under parameters that all of a sudden we have this LName right here. Okay, so if you double click on this, we have different attributes for our parameter, and I'll show you how to modify this in a little bit. You'll see under available values that we have none, specify values, or get values from a query. If we keep it as none, then it's up to the user to manually type it in at the top. So what I want you to do now is just click on preview, and you'll see here that we have a parameter now for our last name. Okay, so we can put in here Smith. Now let's view our report. Now we have all the different Smiths here. Okay, now if you want to change what this label is, not a problem. Just go back into design mode, double click under parameters, and the prompt should say last name. Now when we preview this, it looks a little bit nicer. Now it's fine if you allow the user to just type in the last name directly, but there's other things you can do. For example, if you want to provide a drop-down list of the full names of all the people, you can do that. Let's go back into design mode. We're going to right click on our data set, go into our query here, and let's get rid of this where clause. Let's also get rid of this parameter up here. If we want to provide a drop-down list of all the customers, then we're going to create a data set. It's kind of like a list of values. So what we can do is right-click on Customer DS, and we'll say Add Dataset. Maybe we'll call this Customer LOV for List of Values. Here's our data source. Query type is text, and we can click on our query designer. We can click on this Edit as Text. Okay, so now if we right click on here, we can add a table. Once again, we're interested in dim customer, and then hit close. Now, we're interested in the customer key, their first name, and their last name. We can do an order by clause. We can directly type it in here, or we can say order by 1 and then 2, like that. Let's hit OK, and then OK again. So here's our list of values. Now what I'd like to do is create what we call a calculated value. It's basically we want to have a concatenation of the last name and the first name. So I'm going to right click on here, I'm going to add a calculated field, and I'm going to call this simply name. And as far as the expression, you can click on that button there, and here are our different fields, and I'm going to have this be the last name, followed by, to concatenate things you use an ampersand, followed by a comma and a space, followed by the first name, and then OK. Then hit OK right there. And so now, when we choose our data set right in here, you can right click on here and you can say query. And now you can say where customer key. So the reason why we say customer key is our drop-down list is actually going to send the customer key value, even though it displays the last and first name. So where cust key equals, and we'll just call this cust key right here. Okay, so now we can hit OK. And you'll see under our parameters that we have our cust key right up here. So let's double click on this, and under available values we'll say get values from query. What's our data set? Well, it's that customer LOV. The value field is what is actually getting submitted to the query, so it's the customer key. And the label field is that calculated field that we just created. Okay, so let's hit OK right there. And let's go ahead and preview. Once again, this might take a few seconds. Okay, so here is our report in preview mode. Notice that we have a drop-down list of all the different customers. Okay, so I can choose, for example, Samantha Garcia, and then click on View Report. And here is all the order information for her. So we have our sales order number, sales order line number, and the sales amount. I can go back to design mode. I'm going to change this prompt here. For the customer key, I'll just say here customer. And then I can scroll over here, and for the sales amount, I can right click on here and say add total. So I can have a sum of the sales amounts. So let's go ahead and preview this again. And now let's go ahead and select someone. Let's choose Aaron Adams and then view the report. Okay, there we have him. There's the sales amount, and there is the total right down there. So you've created your first parameterized report. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all reviewed the SSRS architecture. We have several different clients to choose from, such as the web browser, report builder, report designer, model designer, and so on. And there's also third-party tools out there. The clients are then going to communicate either directly with a report manager or with programmatic interfaces, which then can communicate with different extensions as well as the report processor. And the report processor is going to be responsible for generating your reports. There's going to be communication with either the data source or the report server database. In our example, we communicated with the data source. When we created our simple report, we generated our SQL statement either graphically or directly using your own SQL statement. And then once you define that SQL statement, then you determine what is going to go under the category of page, group, or details. We dragged and dropped a header onto our page as well as the built-in variables to display the current page. And then we also added an image. You're going to find your images from the toolbox and you simply drag it over, then go into the properties of that image and import the image that you're dealing with. Then the last thing I showed you was using parameters with your statements. So instead of having a hard-coded SQL statement, you can put an @ sign and then whatever parameters you want to. You can provide default values for your parameters, and you can even create a drop-down list of possible values by creating a data source revolving around your drop-down list. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.